Alright, so as of the time of recording this video, it's been about 3 days since I first booted up Sonic Frontiers. Not 3 days since I last played it, 3 days since it came out and I started playing it. I finished playing the main game, I'm currently 100% in the game, and I even started a new file just to see how fast I could do Kronos and Ares Island again. And as I was late to get in the game, as my peers were able to get it earlier, I never really put out a review. I guess you can consider this somewhat a review, but I really want to focus on a particular topic, and that is the things that I was wrong about. Obviously, we talked about this game building up to it for ages and ages and ages, but we didn't really get gameplay until June of 2022. Therefore, the real thoughts and opinions came from that point onwards. Anything from before was just speculation based on leaks, etc, etc. So I'm going to break down point by point all the things I thought I was wrong about regarding Frontiers now that I've finally played the game and beaten it. So I'm going to get into all this right now. But if you subscribe to the channel already, please make sure to subscribe. We are trying to hit 100,000 subscribers. Now I know people are going to see the title and the thumbnail and screenshot it for some likes on Twitter, like, Prem was wrong about Frontiers, he was hating, and now it's a perfect game. No, it's not a perfect game. Let's be real. I wasn't wrong about my overall rating of the game. I always thought it was going to land at a 6.5 to 7, and it feels like a 7 to me. But the reasons why I gave it a 7 are different compared to before I played the game. Minus cyberspace, because I knew that'd be the weakest part of the game. But overall, the reasons why I thought I was going to give this game a 7 before playing it were wrong. And after playing it, it was completely different reasons. And a majority of this is because of the marketing, what they chose to show versus what we actually got in the game. So let's start with the wrong things. Puzzles. I thought they'd all be easy, but turns out they hit some decent ones in there, right? Even the square puzzles, which were basic as fuck, some of them got a little bit more intricate, nothing crazy. Even the Tetris that they had in there wasn't too crazy, but it was cool. Then they had the pillars with the light beams and whatnot. I know some people are going to say the cocoa herding because I struggled with that in my playthrough, but even that wasn't hard. I was just being too rushy, running to the end instead of like going slowly. It seems the toughest puzzles were the mandatory ones in the story and not the ones just scattered across the open zone. But again, this goes back to marketing, as they showed us mostly easy puzzles, and whichever more challenging ones there were, we never actually saw in the marketing of the game pre-release. So while I was wrong about that, it's because they chose not to show it. Another thing I was wrong about, platforming. I thought that this game was devoid of platforming based on what we had seen. I thought there wasn't going to be enough of it in the open zone, and they had basically reserved most of it to the cyberspace levels, which we all know are booty. But as time went on, we started getting more footage and we started looking at gameplay from like journalists and things like that. We saw some little platforming segments that looked promising, but we needed to see more. And now that we played the game, we can see that Ria Island was full of platforming. Ares and Kronos is full of platforming as well. If you search around, it's all there. It's just they weren't showing it enough. Another thing I was wrong about, side looping rings during combat. I thought that would be overpowered cheese. And I mean, it kind of is on the easier enemies, let's be real. But there are some areas where rings really are scarce. And it feels like without this feature, things would have been too frustrating for the player. And they have a good job of having little segments where it's not really possible to even side loop rings, like when you're doing the squid boss or when you're on the rails with, I've forgotten what the boss's name is, but those bosses with the rails where you gotta light up the rails to like defeat it. You can't really side loop rings unless you're on the ground anyway. So it wasn't as OP as you would think it was going to be. Another thing I was wrong about was the story. I thought it was going to be like one of the best Sonic stories ever, potentially even carry the game at this point because I wasn't still fully sold on the game. But it was alright, nothing special, but Eggman felt damn near useless. I mean, it wasn't bad, but I just didn't feel that invested in it. And it's not even like me trying to roast the dialogue or anything like that, because honestly, I feel like a lot of it has to do with the voice acting and me not liking a lot of the voice acting. You know how I feel about Roger, and in general, like Amy's voice is cool, but nothing special. Tails' voice is still solid. Eggman is solid. Sage's voice was It sounded like they had some weird vocal filter on her that just didn't fit. But like, if we look at something like Force's story, I mean, that was a mess, but at least you had all the character interactions because everyone was there. Whereas the Frontier story is kind of set on like this talk to one person for the whole island kind of thing, with the occasional chatting to Sage or whatever, but mostly on Kronos you're talking to Amy. Sonic probably spoke to Amy more on Kronos Island than he has in any other Sonic game. Sonic doesn't even interact with Eggman until near the end. And again, it's not bad, just nothing to write home about in my opinion. It had some nice references. They referenced Royal Canyon, they referenced a bunch of other things like Adventure. Tails addressed being a bitch boy in Forces, which was nice. But I'll definitely be skipping the cutscenes on repeat playthroughs, or at least those that are unskippable, because some of them they just force you to watch them anyway. Gun to my head, if I had to watch a Sonic game's cutscenes all in one go right now, it wouldn't be a top 5 pick. I wouldn't put it over any of the 2000 stories plus Adventure 1. And again, that's not all on writing, that's also voice acting as well. So again, I would compare it to the meta era stories. But next to those, I guess it's sitting pretty. But now we get to the biggest thing I was wrong about. And I say it's the biggest because it was the most significant to me personally. And that is the open zone control. I literally cannot enjoy a platformer if I don't enjoy the control or the movement of the character. And my biggest fear was that the game was going to control like forces in an open world, which is essentially the worst controlling Sonic game in my opinion. I know some people are going to be like, but Heroes is slippery. Listen, I love the way Heroes controls. I mean, can it be slippery at times? Yes, but that's not enough to ruin it for me personally. And I'm not going to get into a whole Heroes thing because I can make a whole video describing why Heroes controls really well aside from that slippery issue. But for me, forces has always been the bottom bar when it comes to 3D Sonic control. And I replayed the game on its 5th anniversary, which was the day before Frontiers came out, and it reaffirmed essentially my thoughts. But onto Frontiers, playing the demo showed me that they really had improved the control since Forces. It was a lot harder to tell before playing it because back then we had no idea there was even a physics slider. Remember, we were just looking at little pieces of gameplay. Every gameplay clip just sparked debate because Sonic kept moving differently in each one. In one piece of gameplay, he looked stiffer in his turning, another he was turning on a dime. And it wasn't until we realized there was a physics slider, it was like, oh, there's a physics slider, there's an action mode and a high speed mode, that's why it keeps looking different. We were trying to figure out, is this Forces physics or not? And then you play the demo, you're like, oh, it's not, it's actually something that controls pretty decently. And the demo was running at not a stable 60 FPS, but playing it on my computer at 4K 60, the control is pretty solid, physics are pretty solid, it's not perfect, and I even tried out an improved physics mod that really got me going. But even without the mod, running around the open zone is still really fun. And if they mess that up, there would be no game essentially. The difference between the open zone physics and the cyberspace physics is evident because I don't even like playing cyberspace. I do the best I can to avoid playing cyberspace. I only go in there if I desperately need the collectibles, otherwise I'll try and get what I can from the open zone. Fishing doesn't count as cyberspace even though it technically is, although it's amazing that they managed to integrate big fishing into a main series Sonic game without it feeling jarring. Now there's one more topic I want to discuss, and I know people are sick of hearing it, but I figured we'd round off the debate, and that's, do I think Kishimoto lied about the length? No, I said this before, he didn't lie, he based it off the average player who wasn't going to be that good, essentially. I said this before the game came out, and the whole reason I kept bringing up the length things because people kept contesting what I was saying, and the only thing I was trying to say was that his estimate was not for the skilled player. So Sonic fans are taking those numbers and running with them as if they were going to spend 30 hours beating the game when it was really for those who suck at video games, or especially Sonic. But Sonic is relatively easy compared to other games, so really if you suck at video games, I mean Critical beat the game in like 12 hours and he's not a hardcore Sonic fan. If you play games, you should be able to navigate this game. It took me about 15 and a half hours, and believe me, like I was playing like arse at some points. I mean, I wasn't playing horribly, like platforming I was doing fine, combat I was mostly doing fine. It was a few puzzles I got stuck on, and I'm not gonna lie, I spent like an hour trying to find that blue emerald in Chaos Island because you gotta go around, and there was one set of enemies that revealed like a spring or a pathway or a rail or something, and it was just like regular minion enemies that I just ignored, and I didn't realize I had to defeat them to create the pathway to get to the emerald, so I was stuck for a bit. But even with all that, I was still under the 16-hour mark. I was streaming as well, so interacting with whatever chat I had at the time. But yeah, people are already on their second, third playthroughs and now doing it under 6 hours and whatnot. It's natural. I never had a problem with the game being shorter. I've said that multiple times. I was just contesting the claim he made. I still think he shouldn't have given a minimum time frame like 20 to 30. You could have said up to 30 and that would have been cool. It leaves more leeway. But the problem wasn't that he lied about the length. After playing the game, you realize that they had a separate problem. It seems that the 20 to 30 hour statement was less of an estimate for the player and more of a goal, given the shenanigans they had to execute to achieve said time. I mean, had they not reused Kronos Island multiple times, plus everything reused in Cyberspace, which was a whole separate thing, then they would have been nowhere near that length in the first place. And I mean, the third island cut so many corners in level design, as well as cut in a dimension, if you catch my drift. We don't call it Colors Island for nothing. I just feel like instead of pushing for forced length and saying we have 5 islands, they could have just spent more time making Island 3 to a similar degree of quality that the first 2 islands were, because Kronos and Ares were easily 9 out of 10 islands. But I felt the game took a nosedive in quality after Ares Island. Chaos because of the weaker level design compared to the first 2 islands. Rio and Uranus not because they were weaker in level design, but because they reused so much from Kronos Island, from the assets to the Guardians, even the music, that the game starts to feel stale by the time you get to Uranus, because it just feels like Chronos hard version, which I was already playing the game on hard mode, so in reality that should have just been Chronos. I just feel like if they don't have the time, budget, or manpower to do it, then maybe Frontiers 2 should consider being a shorter game that is fully realized, instead of resorting to creating an open world that restricts my movement to a 2D plane everywhere I go, and then ending with a game that I used to slay on the Nokia 3310. It's funny because I made this tweet years ago and I feel like it applies now. I said Nintendo be like, games should have ambition, length, and polish. Sonic Team be like, choose two. And it's like, damn near almost every Sonic game usually does choose two. And it feels like Frontiers chose ambition and length, because polish, I mean, I guess there's a debate on what polish is. Is it glitches? Is it the overall like fine detail added to certain things? I mean, there's certain things that were just missing from this game that should have been there. For example, this game is focused on combat but has no boss rush mode. There's no ranking system for the combat, so you could do the bare minimum and still win. There's no photo mode, which AAA games are loving nowadays. There's no way to speed up leveling up with the Coco, because you have to sit there manually leveling one by one. The fact that you can't even skip every single cutscene and tutorial stuff as well, like when you're starting a new file. The list goes on when it comes to quality of life updates. You can't even open the map if you're in combat, and it will still say you're in combat even if you've attempted to run away from the enemy and the enemy's far away from you. Sometimes you just can't open the map because of it. But Frontiers will not be the first time that Sonic Team has done things to stretch out the length of games. Just like with Colors, you can see a noticeable dip in quality from the Act 1s to the later acts, and here it feels like Chronos and Ares Island were the Act 1s. Uranus was just Act 1 hard version, and Chaos and Rio are like Act 4s, essentially. And to me, it definitely ruins the pacing of the game. Even though I wouldn't say I disliked Rio and Uranus, Chaos Island is the only island that I'm not really a big fan of from a design standpoint. Visually, it's beautiful, but it's just not as fun to roam around in as the others. I feel like I'm Jerry and Tom is a 2D section. To me, Chronos is the most grandiose, Ares has the best flow and movement, Chaos has the best aesthetic, Rio has the best platforming, and Uranus has the best Guardians. I mean, they're just the Chronos ones, but just more engaging and challenging. But to wrap it up, no, my rating prediction of the game didn't change, but the reasoning did. I thought it would be a 7 because the whole game would be too easy and not engaging enough, but that wasn't the case. It had plenty of easy and even automated moments, but still felt very engaging, especially those first two islands. The game is a 7 not just because cyberspace weighs it down, although seeing the same 4 environments over and over again does drive me crazy, plus that fucking EDM, Otani. But the game is a 7 because everything post Ares felt like a noticeable dip in quality, whether in level design like Chaos or in overuse of content like Rio and Uranus. But the foundation is solid. It's a solid foundation, but again, ambition, length, and polish, the 3 things that video games need to be masterpieces, and it seems like Sonic Team will always choose 2. Whichever 2, that depends on the game, but they really didn't need to stretch this game out to 5 islands. It could have ended after the 4th island with the towers and then go straight to the final boss. You could have also had a separate form for the final boss that wasn't I don't even want to get to that right now, but decent game, solid foundation, clearly needed some more time in the oven to be fully realized at that size and length. And to think, Kazuka had to beg Sega to not release the game 1 year ago. Now that company's a mess, man. Imagine they dropped this shit last year. It would have been Chronos and then end credits. But yeah, let me know what you guys think about Sonic Frontiers. Are you enjoying the game? What would you rank it in the list of 3D Sonic games, or even against the other Boost games, because this is a Boost game as well? And of course, a big shout out to all my channel members. If you want to become a channel member, click the join button next to the subscribe button. But yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit that bell. Make sure to check out the non-Sonic channel. The link will be in the description. But that's all I have to say right now. So, Premy out.